But he had a love for Pinot Noir from his start in the wine industry in the 70s. And in the early 90s, I remember him coming out here to visit Hamilton Russell when they had started off. And with that, he was also a Cape Wine Master and became South Africa's first Cape Wine Master to do his thesis on Pinot Noir. So it's been a love of his since he started in our industry. He's never made a bottle of wine, similar to myself, but he decided that he'd like to move the family and his company here. He was a negociant at the time, to be able to pursue Pinot Noir. So we moved here. I initially didn't think that we would be able to, make Pinot Noir, because for us, when we were coming to Hermanus as students, it was always for parties. You only tend to remember Hermanus twice, going in and leaving. So when they said, listen, we're moving to Hermanus, my first thought was, I can't drink that much. But we survived 20 years now. And initially it was to pursue a negociant model where I'll be assisting my father and then my brother, who would be then making the wines for, call it a more fine wine estate model. We bought this property in 2000. This property was bush at that time. There was nothing here. It's the first time that it's been planted to vineyard. And we started planting in 2003. We built the winery in 2006. And from that have now slowly started to discover things on the farm. Our property is basically 40 hectares, 20 of it from here down to the river, planted to vineyard, and 20 of it which is natural fynbos. And what we have discovered at this altitude, 350 meters above sea level, dropping down to the bottom of the farm, is a variation of soils, and that's how we've started to discover the different expressions of the vineyards. But essentially, maybe to explain a bit of the view, and sorry about the smoke, but we've got a very dry summer, so there is, further south than us, there's a big fire that's been going on since Saturday, and so that smoke has been drifting across with the wind. It's unusual today, we don't have the wind. It's one of our characters. It actually took me to travel to London to realize how much I missed the wind. So in the Cape we get a lot of wind, and it almost, for me, typifies our open space, whereas then suddenly going to a big city like London and there wasn't any wind, I didn't almost trust the nature, But our proximity to the ocean allows us in the Hemel-en-Aarde to work with Pinot. The ocean over there is 15 kilometers away, but actually our shortest distance to the ocean is right behind us. So behind the mountain where Hermanus is lying, it's roughly 6 kilometers to the sea. But also our direction towards the sea is where the wind comes from. So it's the southeaster. The southeaster is our dominant summer wind, or they call it the Cape Doctor. And it's normally seen, I think, as the tablecloth on Table Mountain. And if you look at Table Mountain from the front, we're literally behind that mountain. These mountains here are what traps that wind coming off the sea, and it creates a cloud cover, and then we almost get like a sunscreen against the sun. So today it's not working because there is no wind, but as the wind will pick up, we will then get this. The mountain over there, Babylon's Toren, is almost the same height as Table Mountain. So basically those three factors, our proximity to the ocean, that we get this wind off the ocean, it's cooler, it's moist, and we've got these mountains to trap that wind. I think if one of them was not here, then we wouldn't have that same effect. So for the Hemel-en-Aarde, we tend to have cooler days than much of the rest of the Cape. The Cape is generally a warm region, so there aren't that many cooler climates, and thankfully this is one of them. The Hemel-en-Aarde itself also is the only region, or the only appellations in South Africa that are planted predominantly to Pinot. There are Pinot plantings in other parts of the Cape, but this is our biggest grape variety in this region. The three appellations we do have, and I'll explain some of the finer details. From the ocean to the rocky outcrop over there is the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley. Here you've come up a bit, so from the rocky outcrop to that road over there, just going up the hill, is the upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, and then over that ridge is Hemel-en-Aarde Ridge. And what we've basically got here is granite soil. And this soil is almost an island in between the shale over there and the shale over there. So all of us are influenced by the ocean, but here we have a slightly different soil structure. And on that side we've got the shale, Bokkerveld shale, which is a shale for South Africa, and on that side. So the two appellations either side of us have a similar structure, and we've got a very different. So you're going to find a slightly darker colored, bigger style of Pinots. And I'm speaking in very marginal degrees, I'm talking just for here. that our soils are granitic. You're going to find some of the lighter colored Pinots today.
Yeah.
Then there would be variations within the climate. I do a lot of cycling around. Some days I leave the farm and I think it's nice and warm and I cycle over that side and I've forgotten a jumper because it's much colder over there. In the mornings when I take the kids to school, the coldest part of the valley in the mornings is down there. So there is also quite a few sort of, again, marginal microclimates. But essentially I'd say the soils is the biggest difference. That our appellations have only sort of been demarcated for 7 years now. It's still something that we are all discovering. This is the largest of the 3 appellations, yet though it hasn't got as much vineyard as the other 2 appellations. So even vineyard-wise, we're still discovering. There's a number of plantings on the other side of the dam there, which are only just starting to come into production now, so we will discover more about our own appellation through Pinot from a new grower as well. There's roughly 12 members of our Wine Growers Association. I think there's about 15 altogether. 2 or 3 of them are grape growers, and grape growers again is a very important part of an industry, but I think one that is like slightly call it of a more sophisticated, more mature industry. So grape growers are only just starting to come through now in this area. Essentially, and I think it's an important thing also to remember, is besides for the property next door to us, every other property, either the winemaker or the owner on the property has planted the property and taken it from them. So I think what's for Hamilton Russell, the family's owned it now for over 35 years. Bouchard Finlayson, Peter Finlayson was the founding winemaker there and he's still there. So all of us bought a blank slate. We didn't buy a property with a track record or a record book to tell us and we can maybe tweak it. We bought a blank canvas. So I think in certain ways there's a little bit more, if I can say, emotion than knowledge with it as yet. And as we're starting to build it up, we're starting to discover more about our own properties and the appellations, and I think putting more into record rather than just raw emotion. These vineyards are coming into maturity for the first time. So 03 was our first plantings, 05, 06, so they've all just seen out their first decade. And with that maturity, we're starting to find the consistency now. With the drier vintages, yes, we're obviously seeing a little bit back, but roughly it's 3 to 5 tons per hectare. I don't know what that is in hectolitres, but yeah, it's roughly, because again, we predominantly planted to Pinot, then to Syrah on very poor soils down the bottom, and the Chardonnay. And all of them tend to, the Shiraz or Syrah obviously has a little bit more, Chardonnay a bit more than the Pinot. But why I say that's joke is we've got one vineyard on the opposite side of the valley, which is one of our youngest vineyards, and we've just taken off about 7 tons per hectare. So it's like kind of done, and it's in a dry year as well. So that side of the valley, even being different soils, a different perspective, that's actually one of our only dry land vineyards, and it's outproducing or outperforming the rest of the farm. But then again, I mean, we've been so used to 5 tons that somebody comes into the winery and says 7 tons, you're like, is the quality fine? That I think is the first question. So we're very happy with the yield, but we're going to see if that hasn't been carrying too much. But it's the first vintage that's really carried that much. Up here we have a mixture of farming. This valley was predominantly or historically wheat and dairy with vegetables, and then as wheat and dairy have needed bigger economies of scale, they've moved out the valley to areas to the interior, and now it's all become a lot more intensive. We've got fruit orchards on the opposite side there. We've got horse studs on the opposite side as well. Under the black shade cloth on the right hand side is berries, blueberries, raspberries and strawberries, and then we've got a mixture of vineyards. So very much the mixed part of the valley with a lot of intensive, different types of intensive farming. Yeah, at the moment we've had 3 very dry vintages. For us, we haven't been influenced by the drought as much as other parts of the Cape. Other than that, it was just, I think, dealing with the factors of nature. Wildlife like baboons can be a problem, but thankfully in this area we don't have them. We've had a few of them come in, and I mean, we've been farming here now with these vineyards for over 13 years, and we haven't had a problem with baboons in this vineyard. This year they've come down, and we think it is obviously because of the drought at the moment, that they're looking for different resources. We have got a challenge in the vineyard. You'll see a few red, that is a stress on the vine, which is unfortunately, the Dijon clones were introduced to the Cape in the mid-90s. Some of our neighbours were planted to the first generation of Dijon clones in this country. So before the 90s, all our Pinot vineyards were planted with incorrect clones. So it was from the 90s that we started. So again, I think to give a background to that is our understanding of, call it real Pinot Noir, is very short. It's just over 25 years old as an industry, as a country. The first generation was quite heavily infected. This is second generation. It's not as badly infected, but we do find that some of the nursery work has been quite poor. So we are looking to make new plantings this year of better material and better clones. That I think is one that's underlying for us almost forever. So we have got a risk against leaf roll. You might see a gap in the vineyard here and there where if something gets infected, we pull it out. So the vineyard gets tested itself. But essentially, according to, we are less than 3% virus infected, so we are called virus free. That is a risk, but for us it's a minor one because one that we've planted against. We've actually tried to counter it from the start. Other than that, fungus, it's a seasonal thing. It's one that's always there or maybe not there. This year hasn't been one. There hasn't been too much fungus again in the last 3 years because of the warmer weather. This was an unusual vintage. It was very warm and quite dry up until late January. Then we had quite a bit of rain, and then it's become a stop-start vintage since then. So it's almost to us been a vintage of two halves. One very consistent, and then the second half where we're currently now of stop-start. But each vintage has its character. But yeah, I think literally, I suppose the biggest risk is just making sure that the business is okay.